Brad Micklea is the co-founder and CEO of Jozu, an AI security and MLOps platform that helps organizations securely package, govern, and deploy AI models and agents across the entire infrastructure of their organization. With that, Brad, we're thrilled to have you at the live event today, and I am very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks for having me, Michael. All right, so today I wanted to talk about AI adoption and specifically the fact that security tends to be lagging behind adoption today. And that is a dangerous situation, I think, for folks to be in. So just a quick note about myself. I am, as Michael said, the CEO of Jozu. I'm also the maintainer of the open source KitOps and Model Pack projects in the CNCF that have over 250,000 downloads. Jozu is actually my second startup. The first I sold to Red Hat in 2017. I've held executive positions at Amazon Web Services, where I ran API Gateway, Red Hat, and Blue Cat in the past. So right now is a very tricky time for organizations because the window to get AI right is actually closing from both sides. On one side, Gartner is saying that the agentic AI use is a growing competitive gap, that we're going to start to see kind of agentic AI companies that are haves and have-nots. And that 40% of enterprise applications will embed AI agents by the end of this year. That's a huge jump from last year. At the same time, on the other side, AI incidents and attacks are rising even faster. They have grown over 55%, according to Stanford's AI incident database, which is a frightening situation. So on one hand, you've got, we need to all run to AI, but you've also got, hold on, there's a lot of attacks. We need to figure out how to navigate that tough environment. So let's think about AI adoption. I think about it in two axes. So on the bottom, moving to the right, you have business value from low business value on the left to higher business value on the right. On the y-axis, you've got kind of low operational complexity, kind of low risk at the bottom, and higher operational complexity and risk at the top. So people start with kind of a web-only AI. I'm on ChatGPT, I'm typing things in there, I'm getting responses back. That, slower business value, but at least lower operational complexity and risk. As I move up, maybe I'm using some apps like Claude Code, or I have something integrated with the Anthropic API. These get a little more complex, but the value gets larger. So typically at this stage, organizations are governing by writing policies in documents and saying, hey, everybody read this document, make sure you do what it says, don't be a bad boy and send things that you shouldn't send. But there's no real enforcement. As we move up into single agent usage, this is very human directed. Humans still review everything that the agent does. And so you get definitely a bump in business value and efficiency, but you also do get a little bit more operational complexity. How do you manage all those agents? What if people are using different agents? How do you control what the agent does? How do you make sure it doesn't make mistakes? All those kind of questions. That now gets beyond what just, hey, don't do the wrong thing, read our policy can get you. Then you move up into L4. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but multi-agent workflows so that agents are doing autonomous work. You get another leap in business value there. Again, higher operational complexity, of course. And then the last level, which very few people are at today, to be honest, is fully handoff agent groups. So agents that set their own strategy, that determine their own run plan, that do the work, that figure out improvements, and consciously and continuously improve. Now, what I think a lot of people don't recognize is that your AI maturity level is your strategy. It is going to determine what the cost structure of your business is over the next, let's say, decade. It's going to determine how fast you can move against your competitors. It is going to be a part of, are you a disruptor in your environment or are you being disrupted? And for those in regulated environments, there's also a regulatory question, a framework question, an auditing question that needs to be answered. So as we move from that position of kind of, hey, a written down policy is good enough, I'm just using AI lightly on my own, to we have agents, they're doing real work, they're touching real data. This is the trigger point where things really start to change. And what a lot of people focus on are important parts of the security stack, but they're not all that you need to think about. So the AI gateway, for example, a lot of you will have heard of that term. That routes and inspects the traffic between apps and models and anything that goes along the network. So The problem is that it doesn't actually secure what that agent does with tools that are kind of local to it. If it doesn't go over the network, that AI gateway doesn't see it. So that creates risk that you may not have visible. Guardrails. Lots of people talk about guardrails. Obviously OpenAI, Anthropic, Grok, all the others, Gemini, have their own guardrails. And that inspects prompts and outputs. It looks for things like, hate speech or, other verbal problems. The thing that a lot of people forget there is that those guardrails from the big foundational labs are built to protect them, not to protect you. Those guardrails don't stop a model from parsing and reading sensitive data that it shouldn't have access to. And so there are a lot of things that you need in addition to those guardrails to protect you. Local sandboxes. Some of you may have heard of this. If you're doing engineering, you probably have. Engineers right now tend to use Claude Code and Codex on their machine to write code a lot. And in those cases, some of them will have a local sandbox, kind of a little environment that the agent lives in, that it works in. That's meant to contain the code during that development phase, but it's not really designed to work in production. It's not something that is really bulletproof. Developers can typically override those policies, make them more flexible, more constrained. It really still comes back to, are those developers making smart judgments with this? And the identity provider, everybody's got an identity IDP system or an IAM system. And that, of course, controls kind of broadly what the agents can access, but it doesn't really well handle a situation where an agent is compromised, i.e. it's malicious or it's hallucinating, because in those cases, agents don't act like humans do and that identity providers have been designed to work with. So I'm going to encourage everybody to think in three kind of domains broadly to help kind of get your brain around this. So the first one is the supply chain. And I don't mean like how do you ship products in a physical sense. I mean, how do you ship software? How do you get the AI? How do you get the agent? Where does it come from? So first of all, you need to understand, did it come from a trusted source? Am I sure that this really is a trusted source? There have been attacks where people, malicious actors, have faked pretending to be, a major vendor and release something which was malicious under that vendor's name, even though they were not actually that vendor. So you got to watch out for that kind of spoofing. You want to be able to sign those things so that you can know that, hey, they have been approved. They are what we want them to be. Then you got to think about the runtime. What's going to happen? How do you eliminate that risk when you're executing and running these agents? So that's going to be things like make sure your policies are code so that they can actually be enforced by that agent, not just in documents that are necessary for humans to read. You've got to look at cost and behavior monitoring, and you've got to think about how much isolation do I need? In production, you need real VM or in some cases, even hardware-based isolation. If you're just mucking around on your laptop, you may not need anything more than VM isolation. And last, you need end-to-end tracking and auditing because you have to be able to figure out what happened and can I prove that it was safe? So that can mean cryptographically chained logs. That can mean lineage tracing from where did I get this model? How did it use it? What did it do? And where did that end up? Now, the tricky part is that most organizations we've been working with find that they are at least one level higher up in that maturity model than they think they are. And that's a real problem because typically the governance and the policies and those mechanisms, the security systems are all built to where the organization believes they are. And if they're a level higher in reality, then there is a gap. That risk comes from that gap. So if you're moving from just, hey, I'm typing in some prompts into ChatGPT to, I've got some apps now that use ChatGPT and kind of prompt it behind the scenes, that's an L1 to L2 transition. You need to think about visibility. You need to think about how do I begin to enforce protections that go beyond just the human understands they shouldn't send credit card data to Claude. Now, the really critical transition comes if you're moving from L2 to actual agentic use. And that, like I said, could be something simple like Claude Code on my laptop, but it could be something much broader. Like I have a customer support agent that actually answers queries from my customers based on a large knowledge base that it can get access to. Once I make that transition, I now need to think about where did that agent come from? When I get updates to agent, are they real? Are they the ones from the company? Are they safe? I need to make sure that whatever I did look at that was safe when I pulled it down from that company is still the same thing that landed in the system that's actually going to run that agent, because things can get corrupted in between that step. There's a lot of things that go into the runtime controls as well, because now it's not just, hey, there's something running on my laptop, I could compromise whatever's on my laptop. This may now be an agent running in a central data center that has access to a huge amount more data, a huge amount more surface area. You have to make sure that's safe. Once you move from there into chains of agents and a certain amount of autonomy, then you have to look at agent to agent trust policies. You have to think about how do we centrally control all that, but then locally enforce it. And how do we make sure that audit chain actually works end to end across all those different agents? If you have to try and stitch together what did each agent do, and you've got 5 agents over a few weeks, that can be months worth of effort that you want to avoid if you can. And then 4 to 5, again, you get into a whole another world of explainability and trust signals from those multiple agents. So what I would suggest is start with 6 properties within those 3 buckets now, kind of not quite 2 per, but essentially 6 things. You want to be able to verify, as I said, what you're bringing into your organization before you run it. I think of it like my house. I've got a couple locks on my front door, keeps that nice and safe. But if I invite a burglar in, then those locks didn't help. So I got to make sure, first of all, I'm not inviting something malicious in. I've got to verify it before I run it. I've got to put effort into how am I getting these things into my organization and are they safe? That means I've got to know where they came from. That's lineage. So I've got to know, did this really come from GitHub? Is this update including only the kind of things that I would expect it to include? Are there any suspicious things that this wants to do that maybe I don't think it should? I want my security policies as code, not just as documents, because if I can't enforce them in the machine, then they're not really relevant to the agent. I can prompt an agent and say, don't delete anything. But there are many examples of agents reading those prompts, trying to do the right thing, and still deleting something, for example. So a prompt is not a guarantee. It is a suggestion. You need central rules, but local enforcement. So in most organizations, you want to have a group kind of responsible for saying, hey, this is what defines safe for our organization. But when it comes to enforcement, you can't always be kind of calling back to that central org. They'll become inundated. You've got to have a way to distribute that policy out to the edge, out to where it's actually going to run, to make sure that those agents work, even if there is no connectivity, because there are lots of cases where you can have internet down between a central location and the edge. You need to have those zero connectivity requirements that I just talked about to make sure that things remain safe, and you need the tamper evident audit log. So 4 things to do this quarter, keeping it nice and simple. Identify where on that maturity curve your highest risk AI use is operating today. So in other words, figure out where reality is. Don't think about where you think it is or where you want it to be. You got to dig in a little bit deeper and go, where are we actually today? Then identify what that next maturity level will look like for your organization, because that tells you where you will be operating within. I said 12 months on the slide. At current pace, it's probably more like 6 or even 4. So you got to start thinking about that today. Then work with your security, ML, and platform ops teams together to plan for that next level, understand how all those pieces will come together, and decide which capabilities you're going to buy, build, or maybe accept as gaps. Maybe there are areas that aren't as risky for your business. Thank you. I hope that was helpful. Michael, back to you.
Fantastic. I really appreciate that deep dive and wonderful presentation. I think a lot of individuals at the event today will take quite a bit from that. One detail for everyone that's listening, if you have questions on how all of this relates back to your organization or some of the points that you heard, you have some additional questions, Brad will be joining us on this very next Q&A panel. So type your questions into the Q&A box that you see right in front of you, and we'll get to as many of those questions on the next panel coming up in just a few minutes.